I'm going to say something rude for 2 minutes, and you're going to let me say something rude for 2 minutes because you clicked on this episode. So, yeah. All right. First of all, this is the Rooftop Thoughts podcast. I post episodes, not that frequently, but for some reason I felt like making one tonight, so that's what I'm doing. All right. Cool. Moving on. So I'm gonna tell you something that I've been thinking about recently, and first of all, you're going to think, well, I know where this sentence is going, but actually, I don't think you do. Okay. So, first of all, here's my thought. Okay, my thing is if you're always having, people in your life, people like connections that always end up, disappointing you or always being bad in some kind of way, or you just always have a bad history and bad track record of, having bad connections in your life. And trust me, I know what you think I'm about to say, which is that, oh, well, you're the common denominator because, if everyone's a problem, you're the problem. And yes, that's true. I think that's definitely true. However, that is not where I'm going with this. Where I'm going with this is if you are consistently having a bad track record in terms of all the different people and connections in your life, then I feel like it's kind of honestly somewhat safe for me to assume that you probably have bad judgment of people. Okay. And if you have bad judgment of people, I feel like it's kind of fair for me to think, well, okay, if you have bad judgment of people and you've clearly shown that you have, not just once or twice, but multiple times, then why should I believe what you're saying about X, Y, and Z, or about a person, or about a situation? Like, why should I believe your assessment of a situation? And that is what I have to say, ladies and gentlemen, because here's the thing, right? Is I also don't mean, by the way, this in certain cases. Well, actually, I think it applies in a lot of cases, but I think that exclude basically what I'm trying to say is exclude the whole assault, you know, points and all of those other cases. But I'm just talking about generally, like your average person, average situation, right? If you're always in these bad situations and you clearly have had, person after person constantly betray you, blah, 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 blah. And then now you have this like big falling out with, you know, someone else. And let's say that someone else, they don't really have really a bad history or bad track record. Then why should anyone believe you over the person with the good history and good, decently good track record in terms of like judgment of people, right? Or judgment of situations or the way that things have happened in your life versus their life. Because ultimately everything is a choice. Everything is a choice. And you chose these bad people in your life. And I know that's a harsh thing to say, and this actually leads into a whole other point, but you chose the bad people in your life. And before you start talking to me about abuse, I have a harsh, very harsh thing to say, but it's not something that you should take and internalize and think of yourself in a negative way because that is why people won't admit the truth about certain things, in my opinion. But the thing is you do choose abusive situations within reason, okay? Like within reason. I obviously empathize in every single abusive situation. However, you do choose. I mean, I said what I said. I don't really even want to continue talking about this topic because that's not what my main point is. But okay. I was gonna say though that I think that you do choose the people that you surround yourself with. So if you're always in these situations, you clearly, again, don't have good judgment. If you don't have good judgment, then no one really expects that they should be able to believe your side of the story or believe what you're saying because why would they? It's like the boy who cried wolf, kind of. And I hate even saying that because again, my mind goes to the thought of like abusive situations, and that's not what I'm trying to say. Just think of this in the average person kind of way or average situation kind of way. But anyways, because here's the thing, right? I am a logical thinker, and that's not to say that am. I don't have emotional thinking aspects to me because I do. I definitely do, but I think it's honestly important and honestly best to have both logical and emotional thinking, but your logical thinking, in my opinion, should be honestly a lot higher than your emotional thinking. I don't think that your emotional thinking should, honestly, yeah, I don't think it should be nearly as high as your logical thinking, but it should still be there. If you don't have an emotional thinking aspect to you, there is a problem, I think. But um generally speaking, that's what I think. And I do believe that people who have bad judgment of people or of situations, I mean, this is a pattern. I did not say that right. This is a pattern that I have realized slash recognized, which is that I think that people with bad judgment of people, they often, almost all the time in my experience, are emotional thinkers. They're not really logical thinkers, because I feel like logical thinkers are more likely to actually be able to have better judgment of people and better judgment of situations and understand what is good and what is not good, and they're able to kind of put their emotions and feelings aside to accurately and objectively assess a situation for what it actually is. And I don't think emotional thinkers can do that as well. And because of that, I think that they, sorry, but they put themselves in bad situations sometimes. And I think that that is something worth noting, because I don't know. I think that if we want the world to change, we need to start recognizing these things, even if it sounds harsh to say. Because, and honestly, I think the people who would get the most offended by this would be the emotional thinkers, because again, their natural reaction would be to get emotionally defensive. They wouldn't actually be able to see things objectively or see the truth logically or objectively in any kind of way. It's always like an attack on their ego. And I don't think that that's healthy. And that is my opinion. That is my opinion, and I have a lot more opinions where that came from. But I I think that ultimately a lot of things in life ultimately come down to the preservation of your ego, or a human's ego, I guess you could say. And I think that, me personally, I think that emotional thinkers are often much more, um I hate, well, actually, okay, I was gonna say this word, but I don't have any positive or negative connotation to it necessarily, but I was going to say emotional thinkers are more primitive, because it kind of is intertwined with the whole like animalistic, feudalistic, tribal mentality almost. Because honestly, in my personal opinion, the more logical of a thinker you are, the higher the ability to unlock, the cognitive aspects of your brain, which is what separates us from being a human. Sorry, that's what separates us from being an animal, right? The thing that separates human beings from all other animals is the cognitive aspect and the actual ability to be conscient, conscious. um, and I think that the more reliant you are on emotional thinking, the harder it is for you to actually, I don't know, live a better life. I mean, there's so many things I could say about that actually, but I don't want to get into all those different tangents. It's like a branching tree in my mind as to what I could say about that. But I think that yeah, the more emotional of a thinker you are, honestly, I think that the more animalistic you are in a way, more primitive you are in a way. And I know people who, and okay, the funny thing is, when I say that, I think that people who tend to think more emotionally, they'll hear that and get immediately emotionally defensive and upset about it. But that just kind of proves my whole point and goes to show that people need to, in my opinion, stop associating words or things or concepts with a positive or negative connotation. I think that is like one of the biggest downfalls of our society, honestly, is the connotations that we have to things, like, here's an example. This is a kind of really off topic tangent, but something that always bothered me is like when it comes to like racial discussions, for example. I think that I always thought it was really icky, honestly, like when people think it's a compliment or an insult to be mistaken for a different ethnicity or race. Because, first of all, there should not be any type of association whatsoever, good or bad, to any specific race. At least in an ideal utopian world where we actually have true equality. Okay, sorry. Someone was like walking near my apartment door and I got a little freaked out, but okay. Anyways, I think that when once we start, and that's how also racism I think began, right? The second that we started associating positive or negative connotations, or aka even like moral associations, moral differences between, different racial groups, ethnic groups, that is honestly, I think, the birthplace of racism. It's not just like the sun, thing, or it's not just like the classism thing. It's also, I think, just a internal human issue. It's not just about the sun. But I think that, going back to my point, I think the association of objectively neutral things with a positive word or a negative word, that is the downfall of our human society. And so, going back to my point, and again, that's like the emotional thinking aspect, is people who are emotional thinkers, they often associate positive or negative connotations to words or things or concepts or abstracts or ideas, and that should not be the case in my opinion, because again, that is the downfall of society. And I think the whole reason why the society that we live in is so bad in a lot of ways, but it's also good in a lot of ways too, which is kind of funny that I'm saying that, because I just mentioned this whole thing about associating words in a positive or negative connotation, and yet I'm calling society bad, but then I'm also calling it good. But anyways, I think that it's the biggest issue, or one, not the biggest, but one of the biggest issues that we have, is that we have this tendency to associate certain things with a positive word or a negative word, or like something is associated with something in a moral kind of way, and that is the problem. And I think that's rooted in emotional thinking, because I think when you're more of a logical thinker, you can see things more objectively, and you don't actually associate those um moral connotations, I guess, to things as much. Or at least you have the ability to do that. I'm not saying that you necessarily do that, but I'm saying you have the potential and ability to be able to separate that. I don't know how to explain what I'm saying. Also, I feel like I just repeated myself like 10,000 times. But yeah, I have a lot more thoughts from where that came from. But honestly, this episode is going to be pretty short today, mostly because I'm not in the mood to talk right now and I have to wake up early tomorrow. So that is all for this episode. But I hope you guys, what did I just say? I hope you guys have a great day. I will see you next time. Goodbye.